Star Citizen Patch 3.18 has had a rocky start, to say the least, plagued equally by problems for players looking to launch the game as well as those who make it in. But for those of us who do manage to get past the login screen to try and make an honest living in the verse, it's an added complication that we have to contend with. Since many of you have been asking to see more gameplay on the channel, this video aims to serve up some more of that, this time in the form of tasty Quantanium mining morsels. I'm Forrester, and this is a mostly real-time talk through that mining run, from spawning the ship at the refinery, finding that valuable ore, cracking the rocks, and finally heading to sell. It's mostly real-time, as in order to keep the video from being too long, I've sped up the quantum jumps, which are clearly marked as sped up. Otherwise, what you see is pure gameplay. And given the state of the current patch, please don't be surprised if the narration also includes an explanation of some of the bugs encountered along the way. And if this is your first time on this YouTube channel, then welcome. Here you'll find plenty of Star Citizen videos ranging from guides to reviews, so you might like to check out a few more or even subscribe to be notified when new videos go live. And for the channel regulars, please let me know in the comments if this kind of playthrough video hits the mark for you, as well as any top tips on making the most from mining. And our mining trip starts at the Refinery ship retrieval terminal. Here we'll select our Prospector and bring it back to the pad. And this is one of the first challenging areas in the current patch. Can often take multiple attempts to claim a ship, which is what you can see in the extra markers on the left hand side of the HUD. Thankfully, in this instance, it's not too long of a wait until we are given our hangar bay. On that, we'll make our way across to Hangar 2. This run is starting at the refinery. I always find it's quite neat to be able to start and end from the same location, and ultimately, when mining is fully up and running, the refinery is usually where I end up basing myself. Hopping up the ladder into the Prospector. Another top tip is whenever you get back from a run, always switch the engines off to avoid the thing from hovering in mid-air. As this is one of the first runs, I also need to load up the extra mining gadgets into the inventory, so I'll move into the cockpit and do that from there. I also probably ought to put a helmet on. I'll often go out and not use these mining gadgets, but I do find it's quite helpful to have them. I'd rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. Hopping into the pilot's chair, and we'll start up to flight ready status and ask the kind people at the refinery deck to open the doors. At this point, we'll plan out our route, in this case heading to Lyria. Lyria is still a very strong place to go if you're looking for Quantanium. Now, for the more risk-averse, it might be better to, instead of heading directly to ArcCorp and then to Lyria, to do an offset, so to head to some other place, cancel the quantum travel and then head in. In this case, because the Prospector is travelling empty, I'm not hugely worried about heading straight to ArcCorp. If there are some players that catch me, there are some players that catch me, but I'm not worth anything at this stage. And there we go, making the jump across to ArcCorp. For your sanity, this bit is definitely sped up at 12 times speed. And as we arrive at ArcCorp, it will be then following the next quantum marker to Lyria. You do get into a bit of a rhythm with this, so I've got a pretty good feeling that marker is going to be out to the left. And yes, it is. Some of you have asked previously, how do you get the heads-up display so big? The answer is it's specific to this ship, the Prospector. Given that it's all about the kind of mining UI and the mining display, that UI is made extra big in the ship, so it's just something that's unique to the Prospector. And there we had another little bug to contend with. I find this happens sometimes on a planned route where you click to jump and nothing happens. Usually if that happens, I'll just move the nose away from the quantum jump marker, move it back, it'll recalibrate, and then it's usually okay. Failing that, you can sometimes clear the route and that helps. So at this point I'm just choosing where to head down to the surface of the moon. Because this server I know is fairly empty, I saw there were only 18 players on it when I joined it, I'm quite happy just to jump straight down to one of the quantum markets. If you're in a heavily populated server or you're wanting to avoid the risk of being pirated, sometimes it can be helpful just to fly down to a random place away from any quantum markers rather than jumping down, but I think for this it seemed okay. You'll also notice that I selected the destination in the F2 Mobiglass screen. I didn't actually set it as a destination, but it's there and ready to set. That means that I don't have a marker at the moment, but all I'll need to do when I want to head back to Arc L2 is just hit F2, click set destination, and then done. Just a little time-saving tip for when you're full of Quantanium. So in this case I've pressed the button to scan. I always have this set to scan without necessarily being in the scanning mode, just easier when you're out mining, and I'm flying in the opposite direction to the quantum jump marker. Just in case anybody jumps in, it means that I've got a little bit more distance between me and the point at which they land. A nice little external view of the MISC Prospector there. So this is one of my first mining trips in the 3.18 patch, so I've still got a little bit of work to do around getting into my flow. And I've also done a completely fresh install for this, so I've still got a couple of keybinds that potentially need to set. As we move to investigate this first rock. Enter into the mining mode and get a little bit closer to do a scan. It's a Quantanium deposit, that's a good sign. Not the biggest of rocks, but if it's got a high content it's big enough. And you know what, 43%, that I would say is just about worth doing. Now a little bit of a wait as we build the charge on this rock. The first break is always the longest. Just because of the mass of the rock, it takes a little bit more time to put that energy in, but that's fine because that lets you get your eye in a little bit as you go through. You can also see on the heads-up display I'm not quite at optimal range, I'm just at sufficient range. I suppose if you were really getting into the min-max you could get yourself a little bit closer, but I'm noticing at this point that the server is not the most responsive to the changes in the throttle, so I'm changing things and then having to wait for it to change, and that's why we're a little bit into the overcharged territory. So what I'm going to do instead, sometimes when this happens, if you can't respond quickly enough, you can actually just switch off the laser, and that gives you a faster response sometimes than moving the throttle intensity. Let that overcharge drain away a little bit before I put some more charge in. So you'll see I've gone for my usual loadout. You can see it on the left hand side of the heads up display. 3 modules on this Lancet mining laser. Got the Focus module, the Riga C2 and the Vux C3. I find that gives me a good balance for Quantanium mining. There are people that use other modules, that's fine. I think inevitably with this kind of thing, it's whatever works for you and your own preferences. For me, I can have those 3 modules equipped and not spend too much time managing it, so I can have my coffee at the same time. So at this point, with the larger rock broken up, I'm going to do the scans on the smaller rocks, work out what we've got. That's a 100% Quantanium, that is good to see, always want that. And another 100% Quantanium, almost feeling too good to be true here. I'm sure given the content of the rock, it's not all such good news. Now, because these are yellow-orange rocks, they need to be broken up further. You'll know that when they're purple, you can claim them. So I'm just going to break these up a little bit more, just so that, you know, they're out of the way, and then I'll go through, scan the rest before I extract. The timer on the Quantanium only starts when you've extracted the first rock. And here I'm really feeling the effects of this latency to the server impacting my ability to control the mining laser, so just going to let that cool off a little bit. Usually my preferred kind of way of doing this, if you've got a decent connection to the server and the server is responsive, is just to feather the throttle a little bit, so just keep it constantly moving. I do that with the mouse wheel. Some people set a keybind for it or bind it to a joystick, whatever works for you. But unfortunately, when the server isn't quite as responsive, you make the change and then it doesn't happen straight away. And so if you're trying to just keep it in that green zone away from the red, it's not as easy to do. As I wait impatiently for this rock to break. And this is another of the 318 performance challenges, I think. Unless you're on a very performant server, you can be waiting a long time for things to happen. So I talked about that in reference to ship claiming earlier, and it's just as true when you're out mining. There we go, that's broken up now, so we'll break up the next one. Now some of you might be wondering, hey, it's patch 318, why aren't you out salvaging? And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think number one, I'm looking to start building up some credits, and mining for me is a reliable way of doing that. I know exactly what I'm doing, I know where I'm going, and there seem to be a smaller number of miners out there competing for business because all the miners are probably out salvaging. The other reason is I don't have a vulture, so I'd have to be getting a big old reclaimer. You can't buy the vulture at the moment, at least not for the next few weeks, other than if you're spending real money. So I always try and buy my ships in-game, so that's why I'm out here mining, but I still enjoy it. It's a fun way to just chill out and not have to think too hard, and you can have your coffee, and yeah, I like mining gameplay loops. So you can see, hopefully you can see what I mean about getting your eye into the server and the performance of the server. So I'm much more close to the fact now that this server is not as performant, and so I'm modulating what I'm doing by not throwing quite so much power in, letting it just take a little bit longer, and then being a little bit more preemptive with the changes on my end to the power in the laser. Takes a bit longer than if you're on a really high performance server that you get an instant response from, but equally it's shorter than letting it overcharge and then waiting for that overcharge to cool down. So at this point I think I've got most of the Quantanium, so I'm gonna ponder collecting that. Just check these remaining rocks and see what we've got to play with. Now I do know that this rock isn't enough to fill up the Prospector with Quantanium. I think this is the last boulder that has got Quantanium in it, so I think it's fine if we harvest all of the Quantanium and then just fill up the rest with what's left, so probably quartz. Usually I like to look for something that's going to pretty much fill up the Prospector with Quantanium, but for the first mining trip of a server I like just to get a feel for it, so this rock felt good enough to be able to do that, and it helps, it was the very first rock that we find. part of the mining gameplay loop is scanning and finding a good rock to break, this was good enough to say, do you know what, for a first rock to get your eye in and get something in the bank account, that seems alright. So usually I would have the mining laser itself on mouse control. Because this is a fresh install, I've not yet got that configured. So what I've got instead is... oh, there's another bug. I'm on extraction mode and it sent everything flying. Goodness me. But what I've got instead is I've got the mining laser bound to kind of where the ship is pointed. And I just need to unbind the mouse from the ship movement for me, since I tend to use my throttle for that and my stick for that rather than the mouse. A little bit out of range there, get a bit closer. There we go, so we're getting the first of the Quantanium aboard. And the timer has appeared on the bottom right as well, so now we're against the clock. Still, I know that there's plenty of time to gather all of this stuff up, get back to the station and get the refinery done, but I'm also conscious that because the server isn't quite as responsive as you might find ideal, I probably am going to need a little bit more time to wait for things like elevators and things like that at the other end, so I'm trying to work as efficiently as possible, get this collected up and then we'll get on the way. If there was more Quantanium here, as in enough to pretty much fill up the Prospector, I would probably be scanning each of these deposits first before harvesting. What I'm doing here is, just to save a little bit of time, I'm actually just harvesting it in the extraction mode and then looking on the right hand side for what materials are being collected. If it's Quantanium that's going up, I know to keep going, and if I see inert materials being gathered, I'll just stop. You wouldn't usually do it that way, so I can see I'm gathering inert materials, so I'll stop. The reason you wouldn't usually do it that way is it obviously takes up valuable cargo space, but because I know that the Quantanium is probably only going to about half fill this Prospector, I'll just do it anyway, and it's a quicker way to be able to keep moving. Just doing that now just to test each of these rocks, work out what's got the Quantanium in it and what doesn't. So I know that this must be one of the mixed rocks because I'm getting Quantanium plus inert. That's fine. We're pretty much half full through of Quantanium right now, which is more than enough, and we've been doing this for a couple of minutes, so still alright for time. And that one's saying it's just inert, but instead of saying 100% inert, it said part inert and part something else, which I'm not sure if I trusted. But we've got quartz in this one as well as the inert materials, so at this point I know because I'm about half full of Quantanium, I've got most of the good stuff, so I'm just going to fill up with what I can before we head back. And I feel like we're most of the way there. Quick check of these. Is there anything in that one? Yeah, a bit of quartz in there. Have that. Bit of aluminium, have that. That one is all quartz. There's a bit of aluminium in the other one, but I'd have to break them, and given that the cargo bay is almost full, let's just grab this last bit of mostly inert and a tiny bit of aluminium, and then make it out. There we go. I mean, that's as close to full for 32 SCUs. So at this point, point towards the sky, and I'll get moving. Select my quantum travel mode, and I'm going to move across to Walla just a little bit, and that's just to offset myself from the main quantum jump point. So just in case there's somebody there with a snare or something like that, try and just offset myself a little bit. It's one of the few ways that people in ships like a Prospector can actually do something to protect themselves. And then quickly F2, set my route to Arc L1, because I had it selected earlier, so it was just one click to say set destination, calibrate, spool. There we go, punch it, Chewie. So once again, because the quantum drive in the Prospector isn't the quickest, I've sped this one up a little bit just so you don't have to watch me make my way all the way in. Sure, you've all had your fair share of watching quantum travel gameplay. And Arc L1 is my preferred refinery for Quantanium just because it's pretty close into Lyria, and it's also fairly short hop to get across to ArcCorp if you're wanting to sell at ArcCorp. Quite like looking at that nebula with the sun in the background as well. Looks good. Alright, there we go. Spooling, calibration done, cooldown is done. So make the jump to the station. There we go. And so I'm just going to increase my speed limiter for the flight in. This is one thing you do have to be a little bit careful of with the Prospector, just because it speeds up a lot more quickly than it slows down, so it's very easy to overshoot where you're aiming for. So I don't usually go full throttle anywhere near that. We're at, what, 400 meters a second, and that is fast enough for closing the gap. Quick check on my timer. I can see I've got 7 minutes and 40 seconds remaining on there, which is more than plenty at this point. And just to check that timer, I just entered into mining mode, had a look on the bottom right, and then closed the mining mode again so I can go back to free flight. There we go, there's the warning for 7:30. So I've used the hotkey to request landing permission. Do think as a quality of life change that's been a big plus. I enjoy having that. Bringing the speed down just a little bit and making our way around the station to the landing pad. Slowing down the Prospector a bit more. And this is where the Toby eye tracker is fantastic for kind of eyeing up where it is that you're coming to land whilst still flying the ship. It feels like a really natural way of doing it. Deploy the landing gear. And I can see the hangar bay in there, and just try and ease it in. Gently does it. So again, with the Prospector, just trying to keep that speed under control, because it is, the braking performance isn't as strong as the acceleration performance, and so you could easily tear at full speed into the landing bay, and I'd much rather have it under control given the volatile cargo. Gently down to land. Landing successful, engines off, and then out the seat, and we'll head to the refinery. So this is patch 3.18 at point of recording, and I'm expecting an imminent feature patch or whatever that will hopefully fix some of the challenges that we've got. But one of the potential side effects of that is if that patch lands before these goods are refined, I would expect that the work order would be wiped. So what I'm going to do, rather than risk that, I'm going to actually just sell the ore straight away for cash, most of the things that I'm reading about the upcoming patch are suggesting that your cache itself won't be wiped. So if it's in there as Alpha UEC, hopefully it's in there to stay. If it was in there as a work order, there's a risk that that would be lost. So I'm sacrificing profits for a little bit more safety and security. And on the topic of safety and security, here I'm just going to store the Prospector within the station itself. That hopefully just means that the Quantanium timer aboard is going to stop running down, which gives me a little bit more of a sense of security in case anything were to happen. So straight across the elevator, punch the button for the refinery deck. I'm not worried about the time, but equally I'm not wasting time, doing these things. I'm straight in, press the button, straight in, and then head to the refinery. Just saw a person phase in and out of existence there. Wonderful. So normally go to the refinement processing on the right, but instead I'm going to go straight to the ore sales on the left. Select the Prospector. 75,000 Alpha UEC. That's not bad for a half-hour run. Quite happy with that. Check that that goes through to the balance, and it does. Job's a good one. Not a bad little mining trip. So, on that note, I'll pan into some scenic shots of the refinery itself. I want to say, hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, you might press that like button to let me know, keep making more gameplay videos. You might subscribe to the channel if you're not already and would like to see more like this. But otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.